Because it was a familiar face, I didn't freak out when a police officer came to my house. But I was too innocent. The officer's statements caused my heart rate to soar. Your wife is being arrested on accusations of fraud. I must question her right away. Chris Miller ignored my attempt to stop him and shoved me away as soon as he said it, forcing his way inside the house. Then he declared something grave. The victim, who alleges that she cheated them, says that if they receive their money back, they will forgive her. Are you able to pay the $10,000 loss at this time? $10,000? I am unable to accomplish it. I answered right away. Dissatisfied with my response, Chris Miller said icily, "Then I'll take your wife with me. People that craftily defraud others of their money are unacceptable." I was initially perplexed, but as I listened, it became increasingly apparent that it didn't make sense. Was my wife truly dishonest? She has spent the last 2 years in the hospital. Excuse me, your wife is supposed to be working for a major trading company, right? My suspicions intensified as I listened to Chris Miller's account. Mike Jones is my name. I'm in my 30s and work for a corporation. Despite being in my prime working years, I am unable to give my job my whole attention. James, our third grader, and my wife Nancy make up my family. Because of her health problems, Nancy has spent the last 2 years in the hospital. Believing that Nancy's condition would improve, I finished work on time to dedicate myself to household chores and parenting. After 2 years, I became accustomed to this lifestyle, efficiently handling laundry and cooking while helping James with his homework. Sometimes I have to work on weekends, but I still manage to visit Nancy with James 2 or 3 times a month. Most of my thoughts are occupied with wanting Nancy to get better soon. But recently, something else has been troubling me. I've been sensing some unsettling activity around our neighborhood. One day, after stopping by the supermarket on my way home from work, I noticed a person dressed as a police officer loitering nearby. "Good evening. Are you on patrol? Is something wrong?" I asked. The officer seemed surprised, not having noticed me behind him. Apologizing for startling him, I inquired further. He took out his badge and spoke in a hushed tone. "There have been several reports of suspicious individuals in this area. An adult wearing sunglasses and a mask has been approaching children. Please be cautious and report any suspicious persons." After showing me his badge with his photo and the name Chris Miller, he explained that there seemed to be some dangerous people lurking around here. As I thought about warning James when I got home, Chris Miller just glanced at me and left. "I just met a police officer. There have been some suspicious people around lately, so be careful, James," I urged. James, absent-mindedly doing his homework, responded while putting away the groceries. "Okay," he replied, sounding distracted. He's becoming more boyish, but he also seems to ignore what I say, which worries me. "Are you even listening?" I asked in exasperation, but my mind suddenly filled with something else. "James, sorry I forgot to set the slow cooker this morning. I'll cook it now, so take a bath first." I hurriedly opened the slow cooker, and the rising steam made me cough. "Calm down, Dad," James said, exasperated. This time I had turned it on. "Also, you keep putting the laundry in the wrong place. Please remember after one reminder." At work, people praise me for handling household chores and parenting alone, but James is much more responsible than I am. It's probably because of such a son that we've managed even without Nancy. "If your mom doesn't come home soon, we'll be troubling you," I joked. James pursed his lips tightly. "It's fine. I'll help around the house. Mom needs to get better first. Even when she comes back, I'll keep helping at home," James said, tears in his eyes and a furrowed brow. James believes that Nancy ended up hospitalized because he caused her trouble. There was a day when we visited Nancy, and due to the side effects of her medication, she lost all her energy and vomited repeatedly in front of James. If James isn't a good boy, it makes things hard for Mom, Nancy had said before her illness was discovered, and those words stuck with him strongly. That's why he vowed never to trouble his mother again. "Let's visit Mom this weekend. She's looking forward to seeing how well you're doing in school. Now let's finish your homework after dinner," I said cheerfully. James seemed happy about seeing Nancy and excitedly helped with the meal preparations. The week passed quickly, and the day to visit Nancy arrived. James, in a good mood since morning, said enthusiastically, "Let's buy the cheesecake Mom likes before we go. I don't think she can eat heavy stuff, but if she doesn't want it, you can eat it," I replied. With that, we bought a popular cheesecake at the station's gift shop and visited the hospital room. Nancy seemed relatively well that day but had a troubled expression. I took the chance to talk to her while James went to the bathroom. Though relieved it wasn't about her health, the content was disturbing. Recently, I've been getting silent phone calls. They don't say anything, but the call is definitely connected. Sometimes it lasts up to 5 minutes. That's creepy. Actually, there have been police patrolling around our place because of some suspicious individuals. The world is a dangerous place. Whether from news reports or social media, all I hear is bad news. I hope Nancy's health improves soon, and we can have a peaceful life, but it's hard not to worry these days. But silent calls must be mentally exhausting. You haven't reported this to the police yet, right? There's no direct harm, and I didn't think anyone would come to the hospital to cause trouble. What are you saying? It's too late. If something happens, I'll talk to the police. Patrolling near our house as we were talking, James returned. Since James was looking forward to this visit, we decided to end our heavy conversation. We enjoyed the cheesecake and had a pleasant chat together. The following week, when I returned from work, I saw Chris Miller patrolling. I thought it was a good opportunity to discuss the silent calls, but he was deep in conversation with James. "Officer, thank you for your service," James said. "Have you finished your homework?" "I finished it a while ago. I was playing with my friends and just got back," James replied. I nodded at James's reply and then turned to Chris Miller. "Sorry to bother you at work, but I'm concerned about something. Could I have a moment of your time?" "Of course, what's going on?" Having someone around to protect us is incredibly reassuring. However, I didn't want James to hear about this. He's already worried about Nancy, and knowing about the silent calls would affect his studies and daily life. "James, could you go home and warm this up for me?" "What?" "No, I want to hear what you're talking about." "This has nothing to do with you, James. Go inside now." I asked James to warm up the food I bought, but he refused. Sensing my intent, Chris Miller stepped in to help. "James, you're such a good helper at home." That's impressive. However, James wasn't easily swayed by such simple words. Feeling bad for holding up Chris Miller, I decided to leave, but he said, "I'm around here every day, so feel free to talk to me anytime," and left. I thanked him and waved goodbye. When James and I were eating dinner, he started talking with his mouth full of food. "That officer is really a nice guy, isn't he?" James said. "Yeah, we should appreciate the tough job of protecting our town." By the way, what were you talking about before I got here? Did he mention any new sightings? Remembering James's serious conversation with Chris Miller, I asked casually. However, James's response clouded my mind. He asked if you always come home at this time when Mom is coming back, and if anyone else lives with us. He said there have been burglars around here. I had never heard of any burglaries in the neighborhood. Maybe he was concerned about whether we live alone or have support, because James is still young. But it felt intrusive, like our life was being scrutinized. I hope nothing happens and we can live peacefully. James, remember not to share too much about our home with others, okay? James seemed unconvinced, but he replied, "Okay," so I left it at that. About a month later, as we were getting ready to visit Nancy, the intercom rang. Visitors were rare, so I assumed it was a salesperson. Looking at the monitor, I saw Chris Miller. "Good morning. Is everything okay?" I greeted him while opening the door. Even though a police officer visited my house, I didn't panic because it was a familiar face. However, I was too complacent. My heart rate skyrocketed when I heard Chris Miller's words. "I'm arresting your wife on suspicion of fraud. I need to interrogate her immediately." As soon as Chris Miller said that, he pushed past me, ignoring my attempt to stop him, and forced his way into the house. "Can we talk? I have a child, so could we speak at the door?" I lowered my voice so James, who was getting ready inside, wouldn't hear, but Chris Miller ignored this and barged into the living room. Then he made a serious declaration. Your wife is under suspicion of committing a crime. The victim, who claims to have been defrauded, says they will forgive her if they get their money back. Can you cover the $10,000 lost right now? $110,000? I can't do that immediately, I muttered, not understanding the situation. Trying to cover living expenses for two and Nancy's treatment costs on a single income left us with almost no savings. The ample savings we had when NY was working were nearly depleted now. Then I'll take your wife with me. We can't tolerate people who cunningly deceive and extort money from the vulnerable. Listening to Chris Miller, I felt a disconnect with the image of Nancy I knew. Are you sure my wife committed fraud? She's been hospitalized for the past 2 years. What? Your wife is supposed to be working for a major trading company. Hearing Chris Miller's words, my doubts began to grow. How does Chris Miller know Nancy's previous workplace? It's possible James mentioned it, but he doesn't know what a trading company is and couldn't clearly answer about Nancy's job, often turning it into a joke. Even though he's a police officer, it's unlikely he knows every resident's occupation. If he had checked, he would know Nancy had retired. Chris Miller, can I see your police ID again? I asked. He visibly showed signs of agitation at my request. At this point, I was convinced he wasn't a real police officer, but I didn't want to push too hard and provoke him. James was in the house, and I needed to avoid any danger to him. Chris Miller quickly regained his composure, trying to maintain a facade of authority. If your wife isn't here, you'll have to come with me. What will it be? Will you come to the station with me, or will you settle by paying the money? Of course, I'll have to handcuff you on the way to the police station. Looking outside, I noticed there was no police car. Although he had handcuffs, they didn't seem very solid and looked fake. They looked like something you could buy at a toy store. I couldn't pay the money, but I also didn't want to be taken away without knowing what might happen. I grabbed my smartphone, pretending to be scared, and pleaded with Chris Miller. I have a relative who can lend me the money. Can I call to ask them to transfer it? That way, James and I don't have to leave here, right? Chris Miller thought for a moment and then nodded. Fine, but you make the call here. If you try to escape, I'll have to call for backup. Thank you, I said, opening the contacts app. I wanted to call the police, but Chris Miller would overhear the conversation and was watching my every move, so I decided to contact an intelligent friend of mine who is a lawyer. He knew about Nai's illness and often visited her. Please pick up, I whispered. My wish was granted when he answered after a few rings. Sorry to call you suddenly, but can you lend me about $10,000? I promise I'll pay you back. What's going on? He asked, worried. I continued speaking. Nancy allegedly committed fraud by visiting an elderly person's home and tricking them out of their money. If we pay $110,000 right away, it should settle everything. Please help. Wait, but Nancy, please. The police are in my house right now. They said it could be settled this way. It probably seemed odd to him, but that was fine as I continued explaining. He seemed to understand the situation. You're at home, right? He confirmed. Then I'll transfer the money today. Just wait, he said before hanging up. The money issue should be resolved. I'll pay by today, I told Chris Miller, who nodded in satisfaction. Then transfer the money to the account I'll give you. If I assist you, it could jeopardize my position. Once I confirm the payment, I won't bother you again. He handed me a note with the account details and headed for the door. As I opened the door, a loud voice shouted from the room. Mom wouldn't do that. You're a liar. Apparently, James had been listening, and he glared at Chris Miller, his shoulders heaving with anger. Chris Miller looked surprised by James' outburst, but quickly regained his composure, thinking he was just a child. James, I understand you don't want to believe it, but your mom committed a crime. People must pay for their wrongdoings. James, reacting to the word criminal, became even more furious and confronted Chris Miller. Shut up. You're the criminal. It's you who will be caught when the police are called. Hearing James's loud commotion at the entrance, neighbors started to gather, wondering what was happening. Seeing the police among them, the crowd of onlookers quickly grew. Panicking, Chris Miller tried to make an excuse and escape, Seizing the moment, James shouted loudly, "That man is a bad person. Catch him." The onlookers, reacting to James's call, restrained Chris Miller as he tried to break free and run. The neighbors fully tackled and restrained him at almost the same time a police car arrived. The real police had come. I felt immense relief, but knew I couldn't appear weak. While James was showing such bravery, I walked toward the officer who stepped out of the police car to explain the situation. The officer checked my name and said, "We received a report from someone claiming to be your friend." I then explained the situation, mentioning that someone claimed my wife was suspected of fraud, and said that paying the money would settle it. The officers shook their heads, saying, "That's impossible." He had been patrolling around our place recently and had a police ID, so I didn't suspect anything. I said the police took the ID from Chris Miller. They said it was a well-made fake, and that no one named Chris Miller worked in their department. It was indeed a scam with someone pretending to be a police officer. Chris Miller struggled desperately as they tried to put him into the police car. I was just following orders. It's not my fault. Besides, this guy's wife works for a major company, and they're rich. Rich people should share some money with the poor. His baseless and selfish words infuriated me. Before I could say anything, James shouted back at him, "My mom is fighting an illness and is in the hospital. My dad works hard for us. Don't act like you're the only one suffering." Chris Miller fell silent after James's outburst. The gathered neighbors also agreed with James, applauding and supporting him. Unable to respond, Chris Miller quietly got into the police car. It turned out that my friend had called the police, sensing something was wrong from our phone conversation. According to my lawyer friend, Chris Miller, who used a fake name and pretended to be a cop, would be appropriately punished later. The police informed me that Chris Miller was also involved in other incidents besides this one. The calls to Nancy were also from Chris Miller, suggesting he had some malicious scheme. He had a history of fraud, deceiving people to obtain money and illegal profits. He held seminars with a group, claiming they would invest the money and give returns, but hardly invested any of it. He returned about 10% as dividends and then lied about investment failures to embezzle the rest. Handling others' money requires a license, which Chris Miller didn't have. Additionally, forging a police ID is a crime. Given his numerous offenses, my lawyer friend and the police believed he would receive a heavy sentence. He must pay for his crimes. The most important thing is that James wasn't harmed. The police and neighbors praised you, James. They said you stood up well against a bad adult. James upheld his sense of justice and fought against the villain. As a parent, it was a nerve-wracking action, but I was proud of James's bravery. Embarrassed by the praise, James blushed and looked away, saying, "It's nothing. You knew our kind mom would never do something like that, right?" "Of course. I believe in both Mom and you," I said. Hearing my words, James smiled happily. Despite everything, I was just glad nothing serious happened. "Did you finish your homework?" I asked James. He widened his eyes and hurried to his room. "Oh no, I have an essay due tomorrow." I sighed, saying, "Oh boy," but I was relieved that our usual routine had returned. Later, the incident was briefly mentioned in a local newspaper. The headline read, "Bravery of Elementary School Student Leads to Arrest." "Mom, this is about me." James insisted on bringing the newspaper to show Nancy during our visit, even though I had already told her, and the hospital had several newspapers, including the local one. Nancy acted surprised as if she was seeing it for the first time. "No way. Is that really you, James? It can't be." "It's true." James eagerly pointed out his name. "It says James Jones right here." Nancy reacted with exaggerated surprise, making James even more excited. Watching the two of them with a smile, I also told Nancy about what happened. James was really brave. He shouted, "My mom would never do that," and scared the criminal. "Did James really say that? He's grown up so much," Nancy said, patting James's head. For some reason, James had tears in his eyes when Nancy, looking concerned, asked, "What's wrong?" James replied in a small voice, "I've been good and tried hard so I wouldn't trouble you. Please get better soon. I think you got sick because of me." Nancy gently hugged James as he started to cry. This illness isn't your fault, James. God gave me this challenge, but it's one I can overcome. It's going to be okay. Nancy then seemed to remember something and added, I once said, if you don't behave, Mom will get sick, but that wasn't true. I'm sorry I said that. Tears filled Nancy's eyes too, and the sound of their sniffles echoed in the hospital room. The doctor said if I keep improving like this, I might be able to go home soon. I'm going to keep trying, so please wait for me. Recently, Nancy seemed to be doing really well. If things continued as the doctor said, she might be discharged soon. I prayed with all my heart for that to come true. A few months later, Nancy's battle with illness came to an end. There were times we didn't know what would happen, but thanks to the doctor's dedicated treatment and Nancy's efforts, she was able to return to a normal life. Today is James's open house at school. It's been a long time since Nancy and I have gone to see James at school together. James has become quite responsible, Nancy said. Indeed, I agreed. James stood confidently in front of the blackboard. Today's theme for the open house was Dreams for the Future, and the students were presenting essays they had written. I remembered seeing James revising his essay several times a few months ago. I usually check his homework, but he insisted on keeping this essay a secret, so today was the first time I would hear it. My dream for the future is to become a police officer. I have caused a lot of trouble for my dad and mom, but from now on, I won't cause any more trouble. I've been treated kindly by many people, and I want to repay their kindness by becoming a police officer. I know there are many kind people around me, but I've also experienced that not everyone in the world is kind. I want to protect my loved ones from such people. I've learned that becoming a police officer isn't easy, but my mom taught me that we can overcome any challenge. She faced a tough illness, but fought hard and is recovering. I want to grow up to be an adult who doesn't give up, just like my mom. If anything happens, I'll protect my dad and mom. Hearing James speak passionately, Nancy and I couldn't help but cry. I made a firm vow to become a father who can protect his family.